Now, so usually then I'm trying to filter this for you. Also, based on the previous slide, you can also filter on the basis of graduation benefits. For example, some people will tell you, I want a place where I can stay back for 2 years, for 3 years after my study. So you will feed that into the system, it returns it. But then these benefits are usually consistent with tuition and living expenses. And by that I mean, when benefits are high, it also means that initial cost will be high. That's why when you study in Western nations, you pay very high tuition, living expenses is also high, but benefits and opportunities are also very high. Now, additional qualifications are also filters that we can use on the system for you, because the more qualified you are, the cheaper the returned universities. Let me explain that. You have a 2-1 or you have a first class. When you have a first class and we feed your documents and data into the system, it comes up with all manner of universities, and many of them are really, really cheap. But when you have a 2-2 or a third class, when we feed it into the system, it only returns universities that accept that kind of result, and they are usually very expensive. So your result plays a very, very important role in what opportunities are open to you. Another thing that is important is your English test, because a lot of people are always telling us, please, I prefer a place where I don't have to write IELTS. I don't want to do any test. I don't want to go do English test or GRE or GMAT. I don't want any one of those things. Yes, there are many universities that don't require that from you. The moment we feed in the data into the system and we say you don't have English test, it will only return universities that does not require English test. And what that means is that it will reduce the number of universities that you have access to. It also it increases the cost, because most cheap universities usually request for IELTS. So the moment you say you don't have IELTS, then it only comes up with universities that don't require IELTS. So I usually will tell parents, if you can afford it, please let your children write IELTS. The reason is because in many cases, let's say currently, I think IELTS is going to be less than $1,000. Sorry, that's even too far. I'm trying to calculate based on what we pay around where I am. But here, because I'm speaking to you from Malaysia anyway, so and it's about I think 950 if I'm not mistaken. And so when you have that, by the time you get an opportunity, let's say for example, because you wrote IELTS for that amount of money, and then you are able to get into a school that's the tuition is say $9,000 per year. But let's say you fail to write IELTS, you are still going to get a university that you can go in, but you go into a university that costs say $12,000 per year. That is already a difference of $3,000 per year, which means every other year of your study, if you study for 4 years, for example, you are going to be incurring $12,000 just because you did not write IELTS. So it's a major thing that it may look like it's cheap now not to write the test, but on the long run, it's actually far more expensive for you. So choose wisely. East is always cheaper than West. And what I mean is when you go to Asia, for example, tuition is always cheaper than going to Western nations. Public universities are always cheaper than private universities, but not everyone can get into public universities because the requirements are higher. Course or program also matters, so be very careful. Qualification determines your option. That's just a summary of the things that I've said. Qualifications determine your options, so get a good grade. If you are planning to study abroad, let's say for your master's and you're already in a bachelor's program, make every effort to ensure that you pass well. You are in high school, make sure that your high school result is the best that you can make it, because it affects everything. Initial price always pays off, like what I've said just now. So consider using a bridge nation also. This is an opportunity for, a counsel for people who think that they don't really have much money for now. Eweje Abimbola Elizabeth, I'm seeing your hand up. There will be time for question and answer. So please, when that time comes, I'm going to call you. Please just write down your question, or you can type it into the chat box so that you don't forget. So we'll get to it. So initial price pays off. Consider using a bridge. By that, what I mean is, let's say, for example, you want to do a bachelor's program. You don't have $12,000, or you don't even have $10,000 to go to the US. You can go to a cheaper nation in Asia and do your bachelor's program, and make up your mind to get the best result that you can, so that you can use that result to look for a good scholarship that can enable you to go to a Western nation for your master's degree. That's one way of looking at, using a country as a bridge to go to where you are going. Because when you sit down hoping and praying that somehow a good Samaritan is going to come, is going to pay $12,000 for your tuition, or you are going to raise the money and all that, it may take forever. So don't just sit down. Go ahead, start from small, and use that as a bridge nation to cross to where you're going. Opportunities don't last forever. So act now, because you may be waiting forever. So this is an idea of what you should be looking at. You want to study in the US, UK, Canada, Australia. Their currencies are extra strong. So tuition is from $7,000 per year, and living expenses another $7,000 per year. So we are looking at about $14,000 per year. And like I mentioned earlier, entry requirement is always directly proportional to tuition in many cases. If entry requirement is high, your tuition might be low. So that should be inversely proportional, sorry. And in the East, we're looking at Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines, Vietnam, and all that. Those are also opportunities that you can take advantage of. You come to study in Asia, these are places you can study. The currency is about a quarter of, in strength, about a quarter of what you have in the US and the rest of them. And tuition is going to be around $3,000 for public universities, that's per year, and $5,000 for private per year. And living expenses, that's not $7,000. That should be far less than $7,000. So that's something that you can look at. Another thing that you can also consider is some programs that we refer to as a 2+2 or 3+1 program, or credit transfer programs. How does that work? You are schooling in a university in Malaysia, for example. You can do 2 years in Malaysia and go to the US or Canada or UK to do the remaining 2 years. That means from the word go, you have already signed up for that kind of a program. So there are opportunities like that. There are a number of UK universities in Malaysia, in Thailand and Indonesia, or the Philippines, for example, also in Vietnam, where when they take you in, you actually pay the tuition of these cheaper countries. But you can do 2 years or 3 years in that country and then move on to the Western nation that you are interested in to do your, to continue or to finish up the last 1 year. There are so many of them. Also, credit transfer is also available in many of these Eastern nations. What that means is, let's say you have started your bachelor's program, you have done the first or the second year, you can now move on to a Western nation using the result of your first and second year, and then you can transfer. When you get into that university in the West, you can now transfer the courses that you've done, all the credits that you've earned in the 2 years of your study, you can now transfer them to this other country that you are going into. So